Seems to be missing over here. Hi, good morning everyone, and welcome to all the amazing panelists. I am really looking forward to talking to you over the next hour or so. First of all, I will say, I think we should have a big round of applause for all the librarians here. I'm a child of libraries myself, and I still remember the first time I walked into a free public library as I think it must have been 8 or 9, and just going up to the librarian and asking, so you mean I can take anything I want from here home, and I can keep it and read it, and can I ask for anything in exchange? And I think all my life, libraries have been a place of discovery, and a place of comfort, and something to stave off loneliness, and find friends, and it's truly a remarkable job that all of you do. I just want to have a really quick quote from a book I read last year called The Library Book by Susan Orlean, which really, I think, reminded me of just how tremendous libraries are. The publicness of the public library is an increasingly rare commodity. It becomes harder all the time to think of places that welcome everyone and don't charge any money for that warm embrace. And what a lovely thought that is. And just a really quick story, because I think it's so funny before we go into this very important panel discussion, that over the last couple of months I've been to schools sharing a book of mine in which there is a free community public library. And so at one point in the reading of the book, the character wants an answer to a question. So I stop reading and I ask the children, who are usually in class 3 or 4, and I say, so if you have a question and you don't know the answer, where do you go and look for an answer? And my heart always sinks because the first 5 answers are Alexa, ChatGPT, Claude, Anthropic, they have all the AI. And then I'll be like, okay, and anywhere else. And then mothers and fathers come way down on that list. Then teachers. And then I'm like, okay, but is there anywhere in your school, a room that you might go to? And then they're like, oh yeah, you can go to the library. So, as Deepika said, the role of AI in our lives and the lives of reading about children is something that we all should think about. But we are here today to talk about the shared shelf. And, each of you play, so this is we'll have some questions for all of you, and feel free to ask each other questions and chime in and, ignore me whenever you want to. But each of you play, various roles in taking books to readers. You're librarians, you're writers, you facilitate the making of books. So, and we've heard Umama talk about, the different kinds of inclusion. But in the work that you do, could you define what inclusion means to you in the context of your own work? Whoever would like to start off.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to talk about free libraries all over India. I think for us at Free Libraries Network, inclusion really means inclusion, and not just as some token characteristic that every library or institution should have. And inclusion for us also means that inclusion is for the people at grassroots, for individuals who are actually at margins. And so I'll give you an example. My journey with library started in 2017 when I was around 19 years old, and for the first time I saw a library in my life. And then I decided that I will start a library in my own village, and then I did in 2020 during COVID. And then we thought that okay, now there is a library in village, and anybody and everybody could access it. 1 year later, we realized that there are no adult readers coming to the library. Then we did some practices. Then another year, we realized there's a less number of women who are coming, and that's where every year we kept realizing that even when we claim to be a very inclusive, free community library, there was somebody who is missing. And therefore, last year we started a mobile library as well to the folks who cannot come to the library. And now we are starting a shuttle service for the kids who are afraid of stray dogs and even could not walk 500, 600 meters. And therefore, inclusion means to us that next year there will be some category, some area where we are actually lacking today, and we'll make it inclusive. So it must be comprehensive. It must be from everybody's lens that a library is truly inclusive. Yeah.
I think
Jatin said it really well. In essence, when you started and you talked about your experience walking into a library space and just that feeling, knowing that books are there, knowing you have access to it. That's what we want all our members to feel. That's what we want anyone coming into this space to feel, that they can truly be part of any practice. So inclusion is practice. It's how you practice. It's a philosophy of how you live. And it comes real by making sure that everyone isn't just there, doesn't just arrive and stay and go, but people who come in to use the library space or have access to your books can truly engage with it. And I think that is something that we've worked really hard. Children with disabilities, adults with disabilities don't typically have access. So if you listen to, Jatin's example, who came first and then who came second, or who needed to be facilitated to come second and third and fourth, there's yet another layer way out there in the boundary, and that's where we work. So that for us is where people who are out in the furthest margins, through the way we construct our practice, and you can hear from Jatin how they augmented their practice each time to ensure the width of what we consider practice or service then changes. That then is inclusion. I think the one more thing that I would add is inclusion is a way of life. You don't have to be at the end in order to have the courage to make the beginning. So when we started, we had 10 books that were accessible to a subset of people with print disabilities, but we started all the same. And I think that's it. If you start, then you just get drawn along.
I agree with Namita's reflection on it being a way of life. I'm going to continue to talk about my mother. And it is about working class culture to do things together, to not leave people behind. Like the feminist and the anti-caste movement wouldn't be where it is today if it was not the way of life to do this together, to not leave anybody behind. And that's why I struggle with the word inclusion, because at the center of that word is who includes whom in what is a power play very often. I run away from places that say we are being inclusive. It almost feels like somebody's not sitting with their guilt, of whatever guilt that is, and like trying to do some kind of favor. And so to really think about this as that many cultures have been doing it forever, and these cultures could exist and thrive because they do things together. And so, inclusion can be a tricky word, because what we don't talk about in inclusion is exclusion. But we have to talk about inclusion because there are exclusionary practices. And somebody is benefiting out of creating an environment of exclusion. And there's such a lack of accountability when we don't talk about what led to us even talking about inclusion. So I think,
Some great points raised, and we'll be coming back to kind of dwell on them a little bit more. And since you're talking about, very interesting points, sitting one's guilt as well. But of course, we're all here today to talk about and have conversations around libraries and inclusive libraries and practices. So it feels important to also ask them that what is usually missing from mainstream conversations, mainstream library conversations and practices that usually end up happening. What is missing? What is being left out?
So much. I think so much, truly. Well, one is the people themselves. When they are a large part of the conversation, then a lot of the solutions flow from there. I think for us, for what we are trying to do across people with print disabilities, books, there are no books. So that is a very big problem if you're running a library service and you believe in the power of books. But I really feel what is missing that is very, very key is deep conversations with the groups you are trying to reach. And I'll give you an example from the deaf community, where I asked adults who are deaf, who like to read, why they like to read, and how they came to like to read, and why others don't like to read. And when we talk with people who like books, and when we talk with them, they remember a childhood where they loved books, and they enjoyed books, and they loved dreaming from books, but those were picture books. And the minute it stepped beyond that, they started falling away. And so we looked at books, and we looked at those progressions. And what was missing was when you start moving beyond picture books, you assume a certain level of language proficiency, which many deaf, given our kind of communities and systems, don't really have access to. So their language fluency hasn't caught up. Their interest is there. The maturity is there. The intelligence is there. You just needed a little bit in between space. And so when we talk to children of that age, we ask them, what do you like to read? What does everybody like to read? They want mystery and suspense and ghastly, gory things. And those are the kinds of things that hold their interest. And so we designed a book that involved reading, it held a lot of information in the imagery, it held signs in the imagery. And once that book was done and you give it to the community, you see the shift. You see the desire to read because it's the only way to understand what happened in the end. And that group reading, I agree, reading is community. It requires a community. But that is how everything grows. Ideas grow, literature grows, and we create better practices and better books. So for me, that is, apart from the obvious, there are no books, is really people need to be a bigger part of the debate.
I think I agree with, and so much is missing, but one important fact that is missing is the acknowledgement of the role that community libraries play. We live in a country where resources have been so much so scattered. Like we are here in Bangalore, there are bookstores, there are libraries, but you come to the place where I come from, and 200 kilometers you won't find a library, you won't find a bookstore, you will find academic textbook bookstores that too will have very limited books, and you will have to place an order and then it will arrive some in 5-7 days. And as Uma Mahadevan ma'am says that a community library is a people's university, especially when our formal educational infrastructure is broken. How come we are not making community libraries infrastructure robust in India is something that we at Free Libraries Network want to talk about. And I mean, even if you see the talks about community libraries, I believe started beginning from 2015 and more from 2020 now after COVID. And therefore, spaces like these and conversations like these, organizations like Librarians of India, who are just talking about libraries and nothing else, talking about librarians from the grassroots, to take the name of Sabha, who is part of Free Libraries Network, who runs libraries in Bastis of Bhopal, and to talk about librarians from south to east to everywhere, is something I think is very much important. So everybody knows that everybody needs libraries, and most of the people who are at the margins who do not have access to spaces. And I think Raviraj said that when we talk about inclusion, we must talk about exclusion as well. And for a brief moment, if all of us can think about when we must have felt excluded, how did it feel? And we must have brushed it off saying, oh, we got rejected from one place, but we have 10,000 other places to go. But think about people who only have one place or two places to go to. when they when they have been made excluded from that very space, they belong, I think. So conversations around libraries, around exclusion in general is missing, and I think these panel discussions, these conversations will bring back a question and an acknowledgement of the fact that everybody needs libraries and they have a right to it, and not just as a charity thing, because libraries often see as a charity thing and not an institutional framework that is required. And therefore, there are around 265 plus community libraries in our network, and we have co-written a policy called National People Library Policy, which talks about access to libraries to everybody, not just a child, not just some adult members, and to everyone in India, not just like people in Delhi or people who just want to read. Libraries are very much so for the people who do not want to read, but they want a place like this. So
yeah, I think of three things, like what Jatin just brought up about we have to talk about exclusionary practices, because unless I don't know what's at play, I cannot do inclusion. Because inclusion is not happening in a neutral environment, it is happening against the system that intentionally does not want blind children to have access to books. How did we land up here where blind children do not have books? Which means it's an intentional agenda to keep knowledge away from certain groups of people. And so a certain hierarchical society can continue to exist. And so I think one is to really talk about exclusionary practices, which we don't like to talk about because it creates distress. Second, history. I'm really interested in what Deepika said about narrative as a tool, that histories are really important. Though the conversations of community library have begun now, but it was always there. You go to an Ambedkarite space, you'll find a bookstore and a library. 14 December, Shivaji Park is filled with bookstores and libraries, and at the cheapest cost ever you can imagine access to knowledge. So history basically has told that there are maps on how to do this, that people have left us. We're not the first ones thinking about it. And third, I think brilliant librarians. There is Afridi and Chaitra, who I have enjoyed watching on how they do library at Hubari, library work at Hubari. It's not really a thing of here, it's a thing of the body. It has to come because it's how it is. We don't leave anybody behind. And yeah, I think bringing them on the table, who's on the table of inclusion conversation really changes.
Thank you for that. I'm sure most of you would have, or some of you might have read the article in The Guardian that caused the kerfuffle a week ago about literary festivals in India and performative and this, that. And then I remember reading Anurag Verma's kind of answer piece to that, and he does bring up the Ambedkarite bookstalls at Shivaji Park, and again points out what we are leaving out when we have these discussions around reading and books and literary festivals and all of that. It is such a kind of small, privileged, guarded space, and only people from within that kind of have these conversations around it. So, because you kind of brought up exclusionary practices, I remember I went to one school in which the library was an unused corridor in the school, and there was kind of rows of glass encased shelves on either side which were kept locked all the time. And I didn't have to ask anyone, I didn't have to go and find out. To me, I just knew that this was not a space that I was meant to go to. So, based on that, what are the ways in which, without telling people, we exclude them from libraries and library spaces which are actually meant for?
I think we can start by talking about the infrastructure only. So there are spaces like these where there are locked iron shelves and the books are just kept within. But at the very extreme end of it, there are very fancy, sophisticated places like this, which also becomes a place of exclusion to the kids who, when they enter that space, they constantly keep questioning themselves whether I should be here, whether I should touch this white wall or not. So I think infra becomes one of the very prominent things when a child enters to feel whether they belong here or not. Second is, if I talk from the rural point of view and from the point of being casteist places for the people who have to constantly battle the stigma that is attached to it. When we started the library in my village, we were of course, we did crowdfunding, so some of the villagers suggested that we can, think about chairs later. Let's get the books and let's get the shelves. And then one of the person elderly said, no, we should bring the chairs first. Because although it's very aesthetic and cool to sit on a floor, but think of the people who have constantly sat on the floor only. Whenever there is a talk by Sarpanch or some minister, somebody came, they have been asked to sit on the floor. And therefore we got the chairs first. And so that they should feel comfortable and they can then, then it became a choice for them to either sit on a chair or to get a mat and sit and want to read a book. So I think very small practices like this becomes very much important and prominent for the member to make them feel at home at the library.
I have nothing very wise to add. That's why I thought I'd pass it to you. I think the why, constantly asking why of any practice, any decision is helpful. Because, like he said, a choice of do I get chairs or do I not get chairs, or it holds within it so many invitations and exclusions or ideas of hierarchy. I would never have thought of that. We sit on the floor as a default, but it's not like putting somebody down. We think of seating from the perspective of comfort and ability rather than caste or class. But that is because the experiences are different. So really, I think it's a hard question to answer because there's no one thing. But in truth, because library being a good, inclusive, open library means good practice, then I would simply say you have to examine all your practices. I know we've had to change so many as each obstacle or each exclusion happens inadvertently. So something that's good in one place is terrible in another. So there's no one truth. And it's about really being watchful, being open, and being able to say, always understand why you had the practice in the first place. Because that is the other piece. Do you keep or toss or just adjust, just add on like he's done with including both options or many more options?
Just, could you give an example of something that you have changed, a kind of particular practice, something that you've changed based on experiences?
So the population, for those of you who don't know, the population that we specifically try to reach are children with print disabilities. And the way that is a child who simply, because of their inherent impairment, cannot take a book off a shelf and enjoy it. They need someone or something to make the book available to them. We end up both creating the books, and you'll see some of them there, as well as just examining library practices to see how we can make getting connected with books, getting excited about books, being thoughtful about books in print, a part of the experience of a person with a disability. Now, one of the things that we started out very early, and that's my bias, is refusing to keep books in schools. Because if you have children attending a special school, anything you put in there becomes a teaching tool. And many of you here are facilitators, and we don't want to do that with our books. We want discovery, we want enjoyment, we want no force, no judgment, and that doesn't happen. So the one thing that we said was books will always go home. And through that we taught many other things, or we made available many other things. But what we realized, and it was fantastic, we can tell you any number of stories of how social circles grow, respect happens, parents discover personalities of children because we send it home. Yes, we saw children, it's enormous. So where am I sending? Realize
that's their library.
so very early in the game, we traveled.
And that began the foundation of whatever is happening
But
inside the
today,
library
I think
will be decided by
we
these
started out saying,
by these
this is how we
people.
work.
And
That's
there are
how-
no fixed
how
rules.
we-
We do not follow like the strict government charter that once was created in 1920. Going back to the history is being followed. And
Yeah, like Namita
the all
was saying,
the rules of the library are flexible.
flexible.
They change as per what the LMC, the
And like
student
many
response
take it for
in the
granted
first time of
ideas
it.
within the library.
So that's how the ownership of the library is now the community. We also don't have any security deposit charges
Because
or
it really
any
doesn't
such
work
factors which apparently people in Delhi sitting and government thinks कि उसको ऐसा करते हैं तो वो किताबें नहीं पढ़ेंगे और वो जगह का ख्याल रखेंगे. We got a water cooler installed in the library in 2022 and it is in the open. So library is in the temple compound. So all the gates of the temple are
So these
open all the
things
time.
are
The gates are open all the time.
taken for
And somebody said that you should put this water cooler in a cage-like thing.
I think
so
what I'm
that people
interested in asking
you know, rail tickets, etc. And the orientation part of when we were just inaugurating the water cooler,
in the way
one of
they're
the
placed in
again very elderly person came
How did they
और वो
begin?
बच्चों को समझा रहे थे कि
That's
आप लोग
where
इसको बहुत अच्छे से यूज करना क्योंकि एक बार खराब होगा तो इसके पार्ट्स लखनऊ जाएंगे तो 10 दिन तक सबको गर्म पानी पीना
a
पड़ेगा.
very
अभी तक water cooler खराब है. It is wide enough. So things like these where you will make them feel that they own the library.
There
The
are
library will function very smoothly and not by some rules.
So
or
really
something
trying
that's
to ask these questions. I love taking pictures of do's and don'ts in the library.
And I want to ask
or
you
do's
decided
and
to make
don'ts
the
in the
library a 24-hour library.
I love
Was
taking
there
them
any
because I
pushback
like
or any
asking
resistance
myself.
from anyone?
Yeah, definitely. So I usually am a very optimistic person, so I don't usually talk about. So even when we began, I will tell you that I told you there are 3,000 volunteers and a lot many more students. So the whole mindset of the individuals is like this. Even my parents were like this. Every time I was expected to go to पढ़ाई, I had to do लिखाई because मैं पढ़ रहा हूँ तो कैसे पता चल रहा है मैं पढ़ रहा हूँ तो मैं बैठा हूँ. तो जब आप बहुत अच्छे बच्चे हो जब आप बहुत आराम कर रहे हो और यूपी बोर्ड आई वाज फ्रॉम यूपी बोर्ड उसमें था कि जो किताब में लिखा है उसको आपको बस लिखना है कुछ इंटरप्रिटेशन नहीं नथिंग. And so when we started talking about read aloud and free thinking, critical thinking, a lot of parents used to bring the library कि अभी क्या उसको आप गणित के सवाल दो उसको आप give them some academic and then we began the library we put the preamble of the constitution in Hindi on very big wall at the library and in inauguration a lot of people said कि ये क्या है यहाँ पे आपको tables लिखनी है ताकि बच्चे देख के पढ़ सकें बायोलॉजी के figures बनाओ. So there were always pushbacks in different ways. One of the major pushback was that how come your library is a 20-year-old? And the place is free, the place is open, there will be girls, there will be boys, can't take it. So we have a library management committee as well, which consists of adult members of the village, retired teachers. Every 6 months they come and ask कि आपको लाइब्रेरी में 40 साल के बाद रखें. और ये बहुत जेंटली बोलते हैं हर बार बोलते हैं डिस्पाइट द फैक्ट दैट वी आर नॉट अग्रीड बिकॉज दे थिंक कि ओपन स्पेस है लड़का और लड़की रहेंगे तो कुछ बहुत गलत कर सकते हैं और वो भाग जाएंगे. So there have been pushbacks. For the 24-hour timing, the girls are still not allowed to sit beyond 8 p.m. Usually boys who are preparing for various exams, and therefore the girls come early in the morning. It becomes one of the society's undictated terms that we have to follow because we have to run this library. But there is a pushback from our end as well, constantly that we keep doing it, and we keep seeing people who talks about doing rules and communities as well, very gently. Yeah. I started my journey in PCAP as a volunteer at PCAP, and we follow policy called PRC. And then we realized that PRC is good, is amazing, but it is not enough. and then at Free Libraries Network we started saying hostel.
Other members.
And then when I entered the room, I saw that there was a poster written Husky Library. And we want all the libraries to be a Husky Library, so that it does not feel again that the charity is
two things. One,
by providing accessible places, fancy books and everything.
I think
So I just wanted to add. For about the diversity part, I think I will just quickly want to tell you about a story that happened in Nasa. So when it was the first free community library of the entire district. If I can talk more about my district, it has around 3,000 private colleges.
And I think that
but not what the colleges that you are currently in. These are the big colleges where you can get a degree by just paying some amount and take a degree after it. And so when we started the library, everybody wanted to just to talk about the library as an academic life. I think also even the kids started coming to the library, they don't want to read. They started asking us that we have to give them some homework. When the parents called and said, "Yeah, कुछ काम दीजिए, काम and homework." And but we started giving homework as well, and then started doing it. And one day, one librarian was reading a story which goes like this: that
in a queer
it is a story about a grandfather. Every story says that the grandfather wakes up, does exercise, and then makes tea, and then started reading the newspaper. And then when I wake up, I see him reading the newspaper, and then
I don't talk about it. I don't talk about it in ways that is
none of the kids related to this story. Because if a story was to be written in Basa, it will go like that. The grandfather wakes up at 5 and then he goes like the reading rooms, then he does some work. We talked about libraries, even some of the females in the home make tea and not the grandfather himself. And there are reading rooms everywhere in Bombay. So there is diversity, especially in books, because it is about the storyline. It's amazing to read about a home or a story like this from West, from that's what happened in America, Europe. But it is also important to know what happens in Nasa and what happens to the religion of something like that. So diversity is good, but it must also be very regionally and locally. Books should be available from the stories that have happened. Connecting to what Raviraj is constantly trying to say that, so that we know the history, like what has happened, how did we arrive here, what practices followed, and why did we agree to, why is it so normal to have a space which do not have an accessible washroom or an accessible, how come it is so much normalized? So therefore, books become diverse books, if we call it, becomes very much important to understand what has happened in the past.
Selection look like if we chose to be designed from the margins and not just from where we are sitting?
I think what we've struggled with, I mean, everything that he's saying about the range and variety, looking beyond books, looking at
I think so there could be a lot of answers for this question, but
how they are.
we at Free Libraries Network have a Books for All team,
For us,
which
a
constantly
lot of what we struggle
looks for
with
books
is
which are being published
what is a book
anywhere in
and
India and
what,
outside.
how books work.
But
And
before
we
even
really
doing the
only
curation,
have one
thinking
way.
like,
Can we
so
please
Books for All
books that
program
do
sends
more than
books to
one
these
morning thing?
265 plus
Because
and so of course there could not be a one set of books that goes to all these 265
we are not book
One of the very
publishers,
important
but we have
process that we follow is that
simply
we speak to the
because,
librarian and the members. What kind of books do you love? What kind of books
you know, it's just so
are being read in that particular
complex.
library?
In
Apart
terms
from
of,
that, we also
how-
give exposure to the
how
members of those
someone will
libraries
enjoy it.
in
There
terms of
is
what are the other available
sort
books
of
that are there
mystery,
in the
individual
world, which
reads
they do not want to read, but they should know that these
It's
books
more than
exist.
just my kids.
I again take you back to Basa,
I will watch
how we
people who will struggle to turn
collected
a
books.
very kid.
When we were beginning,
Or
I
will
put
struggle
all
to
my
turn a
English
very
novel
heavy
books in the
Or
library
will
that
put on
there must be
glasses
some books.
in
Nobody tells them for like 3 years and
something, or to notice that very clever detail
Uh,
that some people
and then slowly from learning
So,
from PCLP,
more
from Free
than
Libraries
just
Network,
children with a
we started
certified
getting books which
disability
are relevant
cannot
for
enjoy
the
books
rural
because
Basa
there
landscape,
seems to
and
be
kids
only
started
one way
reading.
to design
So we have a system at the library for getting the demand of new books. Is that we use Amazon wish list through which we source books. And this was mainly for the members, adult members, Like if you want to, want some
that's what I
like
think
like
is so
send them a
important
link,
because people
and somehow this reach to
quite
pockets as well.
to not
and then
create a
they don't know what books exist because they don't know how to use Amazon.
Like the biggest problem with
When you see children books on the back
is that you can
the publishers put the small pictures of the other.
and it's quite boring because
There are a
also
group
makes
of
you
members, they were
because
6 or 7
at
years
one
old.
table
They started coming to the library with students
like where
they are saying yes,
and
get
said
that
it's in the
and that's what it is.
because it does not want you to know more.
Another thing I want to just reiterate that
wanting to
at Master Library
so
do not
diversity is
accept
like my
students.
mother's house.
Again,
have loudness,
that
you have music,
while
you
it
have
is very much
people,
sustainable and environment friendly
all
for
kinds
folks
of
in
pleasure,
Bangalore,
joy,
in Bangalore, in Mumbai, in Delhi to use
it's
pre-loved
not
books.
so.
We don't want
I
to
also
also
think
inclusion
inclusion is not such
with
a
the old books only.
or
You must have heard of the practice
if
that
it is
has
the
been
most
followed
joyous thing
that
to do
the
and
younger
most
section
pleasurable
gets to
thing to
use
do.
the interciplinary. And therefore we don't take like we don't at all. We would want to fill our libraries with the brand new books which will still
Because
have
what
the
Jatin
smell
said,
and the glossy
because
touch of it.
then somebody can
Library
reach
full.
themselves to that and access.
So that is one thing which as a policy we follow. We don't want our members to feel charitable.
Making a
We don't even call the beneficiaries as the government calls its own citizen beneficiaries. That Bula Bharti
because it was the environment
without
was
the
created
members of Master
by
Library, I would not
things
even
that we're doing
sitting or taking a flight from there or talking to all. So
that's
we keep the members in center for everything and definitely for
One of the students in
education.
Namita Library is the member who comes in and whose mother has helped create a book. And so coming and talking a little bit about
forget children with
which is something that
Many of the rules absolutely
talk to
apply.
us a little bit about what is it like to design books,
And we show the
multisensory
kids
readers,
more than
and
what
how
they
can we
ever
also
ask for,
change
so that
our
they know
ideas
what they
of
can.
what a book actually is.
We do make
So
sure
we all
that
kind of
they
have
have
these categories of this is what a book
so
is,
they can
what it should look
browse
like.
whatever exists.
Like for me, it was a discovery.
But
that
they
there are
also
things
very
that
confidently
internal.
demand
It's
things
not
that
something
I
I
haven't
have
created.
So we talk us a little bit
Then
about
reach out to people to say, these big stories with us. I feel like that's the only way to feel. But I can invite, no, it's fine. But you are most
Now
welcome
there
to check
are
out
many
our
organizations, libraries and
arranged books, but I would also say, please talk to either a
we pick what
to
we
understand
read in
the
some other
topic
library
and
of the
some
world and also in India, and then we send that book as a sample to the library
But I want
and
to
then
give
we
you
see
this,
how it's a reading.
which is
Tata does a
when we
fantastic job of
began, it
on
began
the book
as I
too.
think
So
many
that also
things
becomes a foundation base for us. And because
And it
I
was
also
because
did not
at the
grow
same
up
time,
reading books, stories.
I was working
So I don't know which
with
books
a
are
young
which books are
child.
not. And so
had
these
several
initiatives and organizations are
And,
also helping us
a friend
to
of
read
mine had
fantastic
just
content.
adopted
Like they're doing our job
who was
at Free
3
Library. We
months
just have to source.
And of course, we filled the house with books because that's the best gift. And by the time the child was about 5 months, if I walked
in
in
kind of how
and
we
said,
ended up here and how we
she
are
would
in
look
this
at me
position today.
and talk over to all the books that were lying
about
about,
the working group
rub through the whole
in India.
set, pull
And
the
what
what she
role
liked,
do
pull
stories
me down to
and
sit,
play
organize herself on my
in the
lap,
work which we
and
do
start signing
and
up.
in restoring the
She's not there.
to
She used to be.
And as I asked that question,
So at 5
I
months,
myself,
she could
I had
recognize a
asked
book.
but
She knew what was
Who
in
is
it. She
anyone
knew
to
who
restore
would read it with her.
anything to them.
I thought that was absolutely how the book
anyway.
should be.
No, I think we do have a responsibility of holding space
Child with cerebral palsy,
for dignity in
who has
relationships because
nothing but
that we all
a
participate
he's a
in
kid, so
robbing
he
others
has
of their
everything children have.
because that's
has
because we live in a
interest,
hierarchical society.
enthusiasm,
That's how
all
the
kinds of
society
stuff.
also functions.
So when we began
So we do have a role
building books, it
in,
was very child
restoring our own
specific.
taste.
Children with cerebral
Not
palsy, these
following
difficulties,
these sort of
and you make a book.
practices of
And
tasks
then
we have
you
been
have
taught.
child with a vision and diseases.
Second, I think the in narrative
It meant
practices
that every
we
book that we
the
had,
collective
and I
very
remind you, we
interested in how
started with
stories
10,
shape our
then
identity
had to have
and the actions
multiple
we take.
versions.
and the language in
level
which
for
we
children
speak.
who need it simpler
But
language,
we are really
imagery that
clear
is
that
visible for
disability is
children
not
with vision,
a bad thing
pages
or a
that could
broken
be taught
body
and
that needs to be cured.
Ultimately,
or
we
treated.
got better and
That
we
disability
realized
is an
there is a
identity.
subset
And
of
that
things
is
that
what
work across
we need
all
to
children.
understand.
And
But we're interested in
we use that as the
history,
base
on how did we arrive at this meaning that
and then
disability
we
is
add
something
on
that needs
layers.
to be treated
Maybe
and
not
cured.
solving the problem,
And how there's a
with the book,
multi-billion
but
dollar
leaving space for
company
that
that's
problem
running
to be
around
solved.
medical therapy that
When
constantly
given to a
treats
child who may
children.
have trouble, for example.
So we're really interested in how do we
When
sort
we
of
construct a
talk
book,
about this
it's a
story
lot of
as
work, it's a
identity.
lot of thought,
So when we were
and it's a
making the
heck
book,
of a
we were
lot of
very
fun.
clear. We talked
We do a
about
lot of work,
them as
obviously,
children
in
with
partnership with
disabilities.
the children
And that-
and the adults
that is who
who
they
can
are.
help
and
us,
that's their
help
identity.
think along with us.
The second bit that we're
When we
really
have to adapt
interested
a
in
book,
thinking
it's
about
sheer
is
care.
calling out the
Because
exclusion practices
you
and documenting
really
Because
don't have
unless
this
and until I
added,
don't
first of all,
know
you need
how these
There's no
systems
other.
are making
For
those
90%
exclusion
of the books
practices,
we've
it will
been
be really
making.
hard for
We
me
brought a bunch
to
of our
stop
books
that.
for those who are
So
in
we're really
our workshop.
interested
You
in
can see
just
when
creating
we've done adaptations on a book versus recreate the book.
a documentation of how exclusion
but
practices
What we have to
and
do
third,
in
we are
addition
doing this whole
is
project
you
on
have to
telling
consider the
history or
intention
documenting
of a
history in a
writer.
certain
You have to
way. Like
consider the
interested in
intention
telling the
of
story
an
of
illustrator
Alexander.
so that you do justice.
But how one
So
of
we
his
have a
first
rule in the
intention was to
library,
create a
we do not
library.
adapt a book until we do chase the
and-
copy because we want
and
to
that
have
really-
that respect.
Because I wanted to
towards
ask the
writer
question
and the
before, like
illustrator
how do you
who are
decide
publisher.
the collection?
Who need,
So when we were
who
building the
need to be
library,
acknowledged for all that
we
we've
said
done.
we will get all the books.
Access.
Why
And then
think
we
about
feel like it's
choosing
okay.
books
Now,
from
by
what
law,
the
we
children
can
decide
adapt to
once
book
they
as
have
long as
access
it's
to all the books. So
it's
as
being
many
done
books as we
for a
can get,
child with a
and we
disability
decide
without
you
even
know, what to
asking
read, what not to
publishers.
read. Like they should have access to best.
We do try to
books
ask, we
because
do
Baba
try
said
to
it's
reach
the
out,
same thing. We built it
although
and opened it
reaching out to writers and
because he read the
illustrators
best
is not
of
more
literature
complex. We do
ever
reach out
existed.
sometimes through the
So we said we should do the same
publishers.
thing.
The
So I think
actual
that it's
adaptation
at the
then
collective
looks
one,
at
we're trying
what
to
is the
reauthor
intention of the
stories
story.
of
And you make
how
sure
disabilities and
that it is
identity,
captured in multiple
how past is
ways.
ever present,
Because
in all
when you
our
think of inclusion, you
interactions,
think of perception. How does someone
documenting how
How
exclusion
will
happens in
somebody
everyday life so that
opening
we
this
don't
book
recreate them.
perceive what is
And
wrong with it?
for telling
Have you
history,
created,
documenting history in a
an
way that
option for
doesn't tell
someone
us that
who
we're the
will only
first
look,
ones to do it,
Who will
but we
only
can
touch?
actually
Who
lean
will only
into
read? And so on.
but
Can
all
this-
of this
does
when we
the
are
story
doing
still
at the
remain
collective,
in spite
we
of
keep
these
at the
variations
center that
and
we
how
found
you
the truth.
access the book?
uh,
That is the
that
fundamental question with which
because
we
it's really hard to believe that the person is not the problem and the problem is the problem. We train to think about people as problems. And so when a difficulty arises, we think that the child is
So
having a
Jatin,
difficulty.
question for
But
you
when
I
I
have
say
is, how
no,
can
the people are not the problem is the problem.
with communities rather than
Automatically I look
Can
at
this
the
question
book
be at least something
because the
called?
book is the problem.
I think
Structure the
if we
design.
start by reiterating that
And so I shift, but that's not
principle
easy.
should be there.
That we fumble through it. And
Libraries
when I
should
fumble
be
through it, I
governed by the
don't want to
people
be guilted.
who are actually wanting their help and not somebody
say, okay,
who is
that's
either
what I
funded
do.
or
And
somebody
that's
who has been
what
deployed
we
to manage that.
expect that I will be
At CCLC,
I will
there is a concept of the student leadership program where the active members of the library from age I think 11 onwards, they manage the library along with the librarians. We at Basamurthy Library also followed that practice, and when we were looking for a librarian, we did not go and look for a librarian who has a library.
But I think
We got people in the library who used to visit the library very frequently. Then we set up the student leadership council. And now each month this council along with the librarians, along with the other
very
librarians,
teacher
sits for a week of first week of everyone and just talk about what is working and what is not. I do not decide what will be the timings of the library. I do not decide what books to reach to the library. And I'll tell you how I got very fascinated
What is an inherent
by
bias
the
or a
community
thought about
library as
reading
well.
and
After setting up the library in COVID, I moved back to Delhi. So there was a WhatsApp group where
library members and
library
change
members, etc. And there was a very good footfall of around 100-130 people coming. Suddenly, I saw one day that the number was around 20 and 25, and I was shocked.
It gives me deeply
I
because I have books for
what
children.
happened at the
I
library.
forced them to read my books.
And I called the librarian,
And
but she was very
chill.
chill.
And
Used to be
very
like
often I'll walk
And
into
then
rooms
I
and why don't you read a book or something?
जैसे like
And then one day
annual
my son
मेला
told
होता है
us,
fast
it's
form
like
वो
when I'm
मिला है.
reading manga on my phone. So I was
I
reading,
was born and brought up in that
maybe
place
listening
called
to
Korea.
something and
And
getting ideas.
I can
and
claim to be very
stories
rooted in
from
the
there.
community,
So
but I
that's
realized I was not.
great difficulty.
And from that day onward, so there is an English calendar that we follow. There is a Basa calendar that we follow. जहाँ पर कौन सा फेस्टिवल है जो बच्चे जहाँ पे जाएंगे, कौन सा फेस्टिवल है जहाँ पे फीमेल मेंबरशिप वहाँ पर मिल रही है. And now the librarians design and place workshops, read aloud as per that calendar.
I think.
And when we began, and for same goes for the timing of the library. Somehow I thought that time is like 9 to 5. But then I realized that there are the young girls who only get time early in the morning, because otherwise they have to work or go to school. So then we did early morning timing.
At some level,
Later we realized there are adult men who want to come to the library, but they only get around free after 6 or 7. Then they extend the library time to 8. And now Basa Library is running 24 hours. We do not close the library. There are no blocks.
But there has
And
always
when
historically
we were beginning, my own grandmother, she also wants me to take her name everywhere. And the other organization that I run is called Aruna Mithilesh Foundation, which is my grandmother's name, Aruna is my mother's
people
name.
across the country.
And she said that you are putting your energy in a very wrong place. गाँव में कोई नहीं पढ़ता है. And especially when you are making this place free, तो लोग किताबें उठा के ले जाएंगे, कोई वापस नहीं करेगा. We are sitting, this is in November 2020, we are now in February 2026. We have circulated more than 25,000 books so far. Hardly 1%
we
of
limit the
books
child,
got
we
lost
say,
now.
within
I
a
would also
certain
want to reiterate that
the upper limit
in eastern UP and most part of UP, we don't say man, we say hum. Like, even if I say for myself, ki hum. And therefore we started following this principle in very locally. So if you come to Basa,
we hadn't been leaning towards that kind of book. But through the books that have come to us, and watching how the children interact with them, children with intellectual impairment, children with difficulty with languages, and you see the way they grasp, expand, connect, and you think, what an idiot you are. Like, how can you be this way? How can you be so dumb? So that has been one thing. Just seeing how children respond has encouraged us to have wider scope of materials that we make available to the children. So I think that was a really big learning. A second, and one that we struggle with till today, that I'll give as an example, is something that Dr. Raman also spoke about, which is you feel you are meeting the need of one population, but then you see everybody else also benefiting from designing better. This we already knew, but we didn't realize the depth and breadth of what that actually means. We've seen adults with disability reading with their children for the first time. A group I wasn't particularly reaching out to, but now we of course we do. We've seen, we have an online version of our library that happened during the pandemic. Something I fiercely resisted, because I really see a deep value in children engaging with the physical book at their own pace, in their own way, as a way of developing their individual connect, whereas they don't get that when they're going online and having to listen to it interpreted for them. I did the online library because existing online books are not accessible, so the kids couldn't really enjoy them. So we kind of just bootstrapped a solution and started putting stuff that our members would do. with the intention we'd stop when we can give physical books. But what happened, two things happened. The books literally flew across the world. And the second was the immense value these books held for the families, the siblings, the next door neighbor, who was a supportive reading partner to the child. Because maybe they didn't have competence in one language, and our online books come in many languages. So this is another where we've sort of kind of broken through what we consider who we create these books for. We do, so I'll stop with this.
I think for us, any quantitative number that is being attached to reading, so who is reading how many books, the number of pages that they are reading, whether they are able to recall what they have read or not, we don't appreciate and encourage these practices at the library. And also the superiority complex that comes, that if I have read this much or I am reading, then I am better. Because in rural spaces there are 10,000 other things which are defining dignity of an individual. So we don't want few more factors to add into that. Also, talking about the mobile and reel culture that is there, we want our members to use reel in the library. We are not, firstly, we are not there to judge what they are doing. Secondly, for the first time after 2016, 2017, now people have access to smartphones and to the other outside world internet. And we don't want them to restrict themselves. They can explore, then they can decide whether they would want to see reels all day or whether they want to read books. So this thing we used to do early, in 2020 the library used to just write messages on our team group that भैया कोई पढ़ नहीं रहा है, ऐसा मोबाइल चला रहा है. And so उसको लगता था जो पढ़ेगा वही library. And now if you come, so library has a very big compound. So you will see at one corner somebody is watching reels, somebody is talking on phone also, somebody is doing something, and everybody is welcome. And everybody is also we are seeing them from singular lens only. Not that somebody who is reading a very heavy book is deserve more respect, or deserve more attention, or somebody who do not read. In Basa there is a very huge problem of absenteeism from government schools. But you will see the kids coming to the library, not reading, but they are coming to the library just sitting, waiting over there, just looking or maybe attending some read alouds. And we don't discourage or we don't ask them why are you not going to school, or you should, if you are here, at least read a book or at least do something. Nothing of that sense. I think we as an institution, as community libraries, should create a place where the member decides what they want for themselves, and they should be, their capability should be increased to know what's good, what's not, and then they can decide what to do. Let us not put our biases and our judgments upon the members.
Two things that I think the library should have. One, I grew up in a school where the teacher would yell at us. We had to ask permission to go to the washroom. I don't know why, but we had to ask permission, and every time we would go, teacher would say, do not loiter around the washroom and just come back quickly. And so loitering had a really bad, shameful thing. But I would come home and my mother would allow all kinds of loitering. I would live in my head all the time and she would not snap me out of it. And so I think that's the practice we do in the library or in therapy room, is to loiter. That you have loiter and to know what more can you discover about life. And most of our trainings, we train practitioners on how to do loitering. So throughout the year, we train people on loitering as a political skill. And second is afternoon naps. It's a must. In my house, it's a must. So in the library, it's a must. But it's okay to nap in the library. And so when we do trainings of facilitators, we have a 1.5 hour of break, which means you can have lunch and also nap. Because rest is again a political thing, and libraries can be that space where people can rest and loiter and chill.
And also,
on that. I'm all for afternoon lunch, all spaces. Do we have time for a few questions? We have 5 minutes. Since I feel very unfair that I got to ask them everything and so many of you here. So yes, we have 5 minutes for a few questions from the audience for our amazing panelists.
Okay, so we have 5 minutes. My only request is please keep your questions short, and if there are any opinions, because I know I'm also a little afraid to clap, so you can also speak. Anything at all that you'd like to? Yes.
Hello, I'm Namita. My question is to everyone on the panel. So libraries are also political spaces, right? And speaking about exclusionary practices, having only certain kinds of books or curating only certain kinds of books in the library are exclusionary practices, right? And so my question, so I have like 2 incidences. So one is from a village where, sorry this is a bit long, I'm so sorry, where the government school got shut down because of the budget, and then a person from a marginalized community tried to open a free school for the kids. And the name of the school is Savitribai Phule Memorial School, and the villagers got, when the library opened in the school, and it was for everyone, not just children, all the villagers as well. They were having an issue that we let to name the school Savitribai Phule, but the school library should be named after a Mahabharata Ramayana character, and the book should be from Hindu mythology and all that, and not very anti-caste books, right? The second example is, this is from a metropolitan city where a community library is being funded by a major donor, and their argument was, you should have Manusmriti in the library, and you should let children read and let them decide whether it is problematic or not. So how do you navigate such situations, and how much do you compromise when there is, and to what extent, right, when there is like a question of existence of the space in itself. So yeah, thank you.
Well, I think going back to what I said, that why are we relying on a major donor, first of all? Why are we not ascertaining these spaces as a matter of right? And we live in a welfare state, we live in a democracy, at least as of now. So why the onus should be on the government to create such spaces, make such spaces? And when I say, I know it's a very bold statement to assume that what kind of places the government will make, given the political climate that we live in. Therefore, the People's National Library Policy actually answers all these questions. We have provided a framework where who decides who will enter to the library, who decides which book will be there, whether there should be a constitution book or a Manusmriti book. It could be all, it is answered in the framework, and I would want all of you to read at least the summary of the policy, and you will find a lot many answers. On the point that the library is very much so a political and a radical space, and it should be, because library is not a school, at least, and therefore let the members actually decide what they want, what they don't want. If I say that we only have the Constitution of India book, that is also unfair to the other different kind of books, publishers that are publishing books with certain agenda, etc. Because I also might have an agenda when I say that why should we have a constitution book in the library. But if you see, all of us deep inside know what we are saying, what is right, what is wrong, and given already the reach of social media and the reach of other such content in different other forms to the larger population, it becomes very much to ascertain that what kind of literature we are putting in the library. And there have been instances, even my library is in BJP ruled state, UP, and we do feel backlash at times. We are asked to do mobilization during election times. I told you the library has a very big compound, and libraries in the temple compound for that matter. But we have to, as librarians, as people who are running library, to definitely and clearly make demarcations and what we want inside the library and what we want inside the temple. We don't want the library to be a temple and we don't want the temple to be a library. And now if you come to Masa and you speak to members, you will feel them also, I think, reflecting the very same thing. If you want to chant Jai Shri Ram, there is a temple right there, please go and chant it. And for the library, you use the library for the libraries. And again, somehow the onus is on the librarians and on the spaces that, what we have to do. I believe that if this country's diverse country of so much population is being governed by the Constitution of India, the library will also be governed by the Constitution of India and will follow the principles of equality, fraternity and justice. So I hope I was able to answer the question.
Okay. We have space for just one more question. Anybody would like to ask?
Thank you. This is from a learning perspective. Really want to understand how can you partner with corporates that are interested in creating such community-owned libraries and still stay awake, right, from the agendas that they may have to carry or from whatever they have to carry, given that they may be under the CSR Act and all. So just wanted to come from a learning perspective.
I think, so you cannot escape that unsaid dictation from the CSR and big funders. We at Free Library Network are also being funded by CSR's foundation. But there is a limit to which we can also push, and there is a limit to which we can also restrict how much the dictation of, the translation of that dictation we want to go on the ground. And we resist, we talk, we talk as a collective, we talk from the grassroots, from the margins. And I think in conversations, I keep casually saying, sorry, ये करना पड़ रहा है because ये funder ने कहा है. And therefore, again I will reiterate that it is not my job to run a library. How come the onus is on Raviraj to create such spaces and on Namita to create such books? I mean, why are we not asking the right questions from the right people? Why are we not setting up accountability? Once we set up that accountability and we start questioning from the relevant people and demanding our right to read, I think all these questions will ultimately fade away. There will be no big funders who we have to rely on to do some work, and we would also want to be in that position to say no on their face. That if you want us to do this, sorry, we cannot. When we at Free Library Network are struggling with that, we have said no to quite a few funders who wanted to push certain kind of agenda in the forms of setting up curated books in the 265 libraries that we have in the network. Therefore, and also, I usually think about how, Chetana, Namita started, this work because she saw a 5-month-old struggling. Raviraj also must have some experience. I also felt that, there are libraries in Delhi, where there is no library in Masa. But it is upon everybody of you and other people who are there to think that when you enter a washroom, you can ask the cafe owner that, or the book space, or a college that there should be an accessible space for all. Why is it that if only we are getting affected, then we are answering, we are asking. So we as a collective can ask for the things that we don't need, but we know people who might need. That becomes also paramount as an individual of this country, I think.
If we, again, I love talking about this, about history, right? If we look at history, corporate CSR didn't fund where we are today. We reached it because of people and our own resources. And so we start from the place where that we don't need corporate CSR money to do this political work. That if that money comes, it comes on our terms, and that there be non-negotiables in that. Non-negotiables like no photographs, no personal stories, no invasion into. There are ethics of how we will do this, and we will set the terms of the ethics, because historically corporate CSR money didn't bring us here. Obviously, there are good people out there, and who figure out these things. So I think it's to go back to history to see that we really did, the feminist movement and the anti-caste movement is a people's movement, and so if the CSR has to come, it has to come through our terms. And about the question around Hindu mythology and Manusmriti, is to really, I draw children's attention to that it's Hindu mythology, it's myth, and let's talk about and discuss about it. And the Manusmriti is really an important text to read how violent a caste structure is, that it does not benefit anyone, right? Other than a cis heterosexual Brahmin man, it doesn't really benefit anyone. But it's important to read it to see what is the imagination of the caste mind. And also you need something on the Manusmriti, the Handevas, to burn. And so it's really important, one, to draw attention to mythology of it. And it's really, we run a diploma in anti-caste mental health practices, and we have a historian, Tejas Harar, who comes and takes us through pages of the Manusmriti. It shocks you every time you read it. That's the definition of how slavery looks like in our country. And it's still practiced. So it's really important to read it and have it in our libraries, but with a political stance to see what a violent structure caste is.
Thank you so much for a wonderful panel.